This video is about the historic tale of the lone Viking at Stamford Bridge, the ultimate stand. For more videos like this, please follow and subscribe. September 1066. Along the banks of the river Derwent in North Yorkshire, the air was unseasonably warm. Thousands of Norse warriors lounged on the grass, enjoying the autumn sun. Their ships were anchored miles away. Under heavy chainmail hauberks, the vital iron mesh that turned deadly blades aside sat uselessly in the hulls of those vessels. The Vikings were relaxed, completely unaware that an entire kingdom was bearing down on them. They believed the English King Harold, Godwin's son, was hundreds of miles to the south, pinned down by a completely different invasion force. They were catastrophically wrong. In one of the most brutal and desperate forced marches in history of medieval warfare, King Harold had done the impossible. He had gathered his elite Saxon vanguard and marched them a staggering 185 miles in just 4 days. As the resting Norsemen looked out across the horizon towards the west, a massive, unnatural cloud of dust began to rise into the sky. Within moments, that dust caught the midday light, transforming into a terrifying, blinding shimmer of 15,000 incoming English spears. The surprise was absolute. Caught naked without their armor, terrified, and fundamentally disorganized, the Viking vanguard on the western bank of the river was instantly cut to pieces. The entire invasion faced total annihilation before the battle could even truly begin. With the western bank compromised, the remaining Norse force scrambled in absolute chaos on the eastern side of the river Derwent. They desperately needed to construct a coherent interlocking shield wall, but an army of 15,000 Saxon soldiers was rushing forward to slaughter them while they were still out of formation. In the medieval war, an army of that size was an unstoppable hammer on an open field. But warfare is ultimately governed by the rigid laws of geography. To reach the main contingent of the Vikings, the massive English army had to cross a single precise structural bottleneck, Stamford Bridge. This was a narrow wooden span, just wide enough for a few men to walk abreast, built over a deep, fast-flowing river. If the English surged across, the Viking army would be routed and wiped out in minutes. The survival of the entire Norse world hung on a single factor: time. It was at this exact moment that a single Norse Berserker stepped out onto the center of the wooden planks. A giant of a man, clad in his heavy battle gear, he stood alone against an advancing empire. On a narrow bridge, numbers completely lost their meaning. A force of 15,000 men is rendered utterly powerless if the terrain restricts them to fighting one by one. The giant stood his ground at the absolute center of the choke point, wielding a terrifying weapon, the long-handled Dane axe. Consider the brutal physics of this face-to-face stand. The Dane axe was a massive two-handed weapon with an incredible reaching advantage. because the narrow wooden bridge boards completely prevented the Saxons from flanking or surrounding him. Any soldier who stepped onto the wood was forced into a tight, direct corridor of death. Before the English soldier could get close enough to thrust with their shorter swords, the giant used the immense sweeping leverage of his axe to shatter their wooden shields and cleave straight through the iron helms. Charge after charge of elite Saxon troops surged onto the breach, and charge after charge met the exact same lethal fate. As the minutes ticked into hours, the entire momentum of the English kingdom ground to a bloody absolute halt against a single human wall. The physical exhaustion shifting through the giant's muscles must have been unimaginable. Imagine the raw stamina required to swing a heavy battle axe repeatedly, but blinding sweat stinging the eyes beneath the iron nasal guard, and the sleek, treacherous footing of a wooden deck rapidly pooling with deep crimson blood. Yet he refused to break. 10 men went down, then 20, then 30. According to the official historical account of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this lone berserker cut down over 40 professional English soldiers face to face. The elite vanguard of the English army was forced to stand safely on the riverbank, watching in utter disbelief as a single warrior dictated the terms of the entire invasion. The sun was beginning to turn in the sky, and behind him, the main Viking force had finally used those precious hours to lock their shields together into an unbreakable wall. The giant had completed his mission. But desperation forces armies to abandon all codes of military chivalry. Realizing that the breach could never be taken by an honest frontal assault, and the time was slipping away, the English devised a cunning, underhanded plan. A Saxon soldier stepped into an empty wooden supply barrel and launched himself into the cold, rushing currents of the river Derwent. Drifting quietly beneath the deep shadows of the bridge timbers, the current carried him directly underneath the spot where the giant was making his legendary stand. Looking upwards through the wide gaps in the rough-hewn floorboards, the hidden soldier tracked the shifting silhouette of the Viking's heavy boots. With a sudden, violent upward thrust, he shoved a long iron spear straight through the cracks, piercing the unarmored lower torso of the Berserker from directly underneath. Bypassing his armor, the stealthy blow broke the legendary choke point. The unbreakable giant finally fell, betrayed not by the soldiers in front of him, but by the very ground beneath his feet. The choke point was breached, and the English army floated across the river to face the newly formed shield wall. The lone Berserker name was never recorded by history, and his army would ultimately lose the war later that afternoon. But his actions during those few bloody hours became immortal. He proved that an entire empire can be rendered completely powerless when one man chooses the perfect ground to make his final stand. Don't forget to like and comment for more videos like this.